that I picked some other sections, just snippets. I'll begin with this one. There's one essential thing I now understand about my dyslexia, that writing a book about it also means writing one about my anxiety. Coping with anxiety and avoiding it has become a way of life for me. When I was in school, little was known about medical interventions or cognitive behavioral therapy. If anyone was talking about serotonin levels or derailing the negative thought patterns, it certainly didn't make its way down to where I lived. Everything seemed to boil down to my nervousness. I sometimes deliberately take the wrong direction while driving because in my roundabout way of thinking, the most direct route sometimes involves making decisions my mind doesn't like making. A simple thing like turning right instead of left can become a game of strategy in which the goal is mastering a baffling world of logic that has nothing to do with winning or losing or self-esteem. I wish I could call this magical thinking, but it's more like Talmudic thinking in the sense that every decision or idea attracts a horde of fierce self-commentaries which automatically refer to a vast switchboards of do's and don'ts, reasons and anti-reasons, all of which reside within the subcontinent of each decision I make, no matter how innocent, wholesome, munificent, or mundane. In other words, the wrong way is the right way, once you consider the quirky, hard angles and dangerous curves along this devious highway. This may sound like a somewhat idealized form of paranoia, but it's nothing that esoteric or commonplace. It's simply a business-as-usual way of passing mustard within the confines of a dizzyingly strict sense of urgency that approaches life from all sides at once. A furtive second-guessing and metaphysical one-upmanship in which my mind must always keep a step ahead of itself and everything else. My mind plans responses to actions that haven't as yet been put into action, or in many cases, even imagined. This has nothing to do with the art of living and everything to do with intrigue and preparation for further struggle. It goes without saying that I'm good at chess. Thinking one or two steps ahead comes naturally to me. This way of thinking, I now understand, comes from compensating for my dyslexia. And I should add, until I wrote this book, I understood very little about my dyslexia. Everything here was discovered while writing it. I understood that I was different from other kids. I lived in a world of differences, measured not by appearances, wealth, or even intelligence. The world I lived in involved struggle for control over my thoughts and actions. My differentness felt freakish. My brain wouldn't obey me, nor my parents or teachers. If I had trouble learning to read a clock, know my right from left, hearing instructions, things everyone else seemed to do easily, how could I trust my own thoughts or anything about myself? Everything a teacher said would make me angry and distracted. If I thought I was being asked to do something she already knew I couldn't do, I would feel attacked and cornered. I hated rules and tests of all kinds. I almost never understood what was being asked of me, and I almost always suspected its motives. Everything that frightened me made me anxious. The more fearful I grew, the more anxious I became, and almost everything seemed to make me anxious. For instance, my wife knows better than to startle me by appearing suddenly, especially if I'm writing or trying to read. In order to concentrate, I have to envelop myself in a cocoon of privacy carefully constructed out of silence and self-will. My mind doesn't like reading, spelling, making sense of recipes, maps, hearing directions, or instructions of any kind, making any kind of split-second decision, or paying attention to an entire conversation. For a very long time, I believed that every answering machine I ever owned never recorded a telephone number correctly. I would throw them out thinking, God, this is another bad one. And I also would call the number I would write down, which of course would always be the wrong number. I would have to ask people to repeat things several times before I managed to hear them because I told myself I was somewhat hard of hearing, which I still prefer to believe on occasion. Anything whispered, insinuated, or abbreviated becomes in my mind a mumble-jumble of bargain basement gibberish. It was astonishing to finally realize that my difficulties were part of a larger problem that wasn't my fault alone, but my brain's, that there was a scientific modus operandi behind everything I'd come to see as the peculiarities of a besieged personality. It was amazing to comprehend that all the cat and mouse games my mind plays, all its endless scheming and compensatory roundabout thinking, not only owned a name, but was a disability many others suffered from, in many cases knowingly. During my last year at the school, I was asked to leave. I ate my lunches alone in a nearby Hungarian family-styled restaurant filled with men and women from Bonds, Hickey Friedman's, and Fashion Park men's clothing factories in Rochester. My mother didn't know I was stealing coins from my father's vending machines and throwing her lunches away on my way to school. She thought I was eating in the school cafeteria with all the other kids. For certain, she didn't know that none of them wanted to sit with me or that they made fun of me even when I sat by myself at a table across the room. I thought not being able to learn anything made everyone hate me. I had no idea that my dyslexia was the reason I ate alone every day in a restaurant with blue and red unicorns on the wallpaper, ordering the same dish of Hungarian goulash and a glass of milk, even though I detested milk almost as much as the sticky, always too hot stew of dark meat and overcooked potatoes and vegetables. I ordered the same thing every day because I had overheard a man ordering it on my first afternoon there, and I couldn't read the menu and was too embarrassed to ask the waitress. I will never forget the sad, tired faces of the men eating silently at the counter, reading their newspapers before returning to the kind of jobs my mother said I would have if I didn't learn to read and write. I watched as they chewed, frowning like robots. The white-haired waitress always asked if there wasn't something else she could get me since I hardly ever touched my food. But I preferred being alone to the terror of the school cafeteria. This tiny restaurant was in the midst of the men's clothing factory in Rochester, an industry where both my grandfather came to work as tailors, Jewish immigrants going either to New York City to work in the women's garment center or to Rochester in the men's, with its tiny refugee army of men and women. My mother worked as a filing clerk until she was 33 and married my father. It was low-paid, repetitive work she hated with every fiber of her being, and she couldn't bear to think her only child might have to do it as well. Why had she suffered all that if not for me, to ensure that my life would be infinitely more rewarding than hers? The languages my grandma and her friends spoke were all as broken and insufficient as the fences, shingles, roofs of our neighborhood, where everyone was always too tired to fix anything. And now my mind was broken too. What I remember best about those long, lonely afternoons in Rochester is the corner table with the plastic red checkered tablecloth, where I sat looking out the window at the endlessly falling snow. What did it matter if I kept losing my temper or couldn't organize my thoughts into understandable patterns of speech? If I thought multiplication tables meant many tables, and got scared every time a teacher looked my way? If I couldn't add and subtract, spell, or know who the President of the United States was? If I was the stupidest kid in the world? In those few moments staring out that window at the endless snow, all that mattered was that no one, not even myself, seemed to be holding me in disfavor, judging me as unworthy of respect and affection. All that mattered was this respite of peaceful nothingness, which I loved beyond reproach. In one last section. Not much was known about dyslexia in 1956, certainly not in the particular school in Rochester's inner city, Lack of training and exhaustion forced many of these teachers, already overwhelmed by overcrowding and a range of other frustrations, to segregate the learners from the non-learners. We, the non-learners, were pretty much left to ourselves. I have a memory from that time in which a book was placed in my hand by our teacher. "Here, look at the pictures. Just sit there pretending you're reading it," she said. Did she really say this? Would any self-respecting teacher actually say something like this to a child in her class? Having seen all the hard, dedicated work teachers do at my children's classes and all the truly inspired teachers I've had the pleasure to work with as a visiting poet in 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classes in various schools around the country, I find it hard to believe. But the memory persists. My teachers were most likely performing the best they could under demanding and thankless conditions. Kids like me, Billy, and Emily were expected to fall through the cracks. While addressing the rest of the class, our teacher would turn her back on us as if we weren't worthy of being addressed. It was understood by everyone that we had been given up on. Being given up on is a very peculiar feeling. I'd sit at my desk looking at the shared picture book, pretending not to be eavesdropping on the conversation taking place beyond the assumed reach of my intelligence, staring at the pictures with all the intensity I could muster in order to avoid having to look up into anyone's eyes. Occasionally, Billy would kick me under the table, trying to make me laugh. Sometimes I would make a face or pretend to be bored, but it was all play acting. I wanted desperately to be included, to be perceived as being presentable enough to be addressed. But Billy didn't seem to mind being seen this way. In fact, he took it as a compliment, since it was obvious we knew things the others didn't, like how to breathe through our ears and make firecrackers out of Drano and Epsom salt. They were the real dummies. He named us after popular TV Western stars. He was Pancho the moron, while I was the Cisco Kid idiot. We invented a secret 3-fingered handshake and a way of pronouncing words by half swallowing, half whispering them. A secret guttural language consisting of grunts and whistles for and by morons. We kidded each other about who was more stupid and who had the worst father. His, a toothless, overweight, drunken night shift janitor at DuPont's who lived with someone Billy claimed was a professional prostitute, one hands down. His younger brother, Ronnie, who put on shows for us wearing her hats and underwear, claimed he knew more about sex than anyone in the Finger Lakes and proved it by going on to becoming a cross-dressing teenage prostitute. We spent a good deal of time playing hooky, stealing cans of soup, spaghetti, peaches, and candy bars from Levy's grocery, capturing butterflies in jars and looking at his father's enormous collection of nudist magazines. I was never sure what Billy liked about me, but I admired his fearless tenacity and headlong appetite for adventure and bravado. He was my one friend, the only one I can remember having in grade or high school. His belief in embracing one's position in the world as an honor bestowed upon the chosen and select, no matter how low or disposable, is an idea I still hold dear. It was a position and ours. Our friendship, I imagined, was the kind soldiers forged in war, a bond born of survival, familiarity, and mutual respect. His attitude was that our being placed at the dummy table was a position and bond of privilege. I was saddened to hear, many years later, after I left for college, that Billy had joined the Army and was killed in Vietnam. You know, I think I'm going to end there. Thank you. I think that's around the time.